Hello to you all. This video is about half a month late at this point, but I'm gonna be recapping my December reads. December was interesting, turn of the year and all that jazz. But sometimes when you turn the year, you get caught up in the festivities. You fall behind on some stuff. This being one of them. My monthly recaps of books I read that are just really for me at this point. So I've stopped doing what I read in X month has to count as what I started and read and finished in X month. These are the books I finished in December of 2019, not the ones that I started. So I'm gonna be checking my phone because I got the list there. So the first one, and this is in order of how I finished it. The first one was Dr. Sleep. I believe I started that book back in October because I wanted to finish it before the movie came out. I think the movie came out the 1st of November, and I wanted to finish it before the movie came out. I started reading that, the Readathon, Dewey's Readathon, the 24-hour Readathon helped. I made some progress there. I started reading that, but sometimes either you're in a Stephen King book or you're just enjoying a Stephen King book. I was just enjoying that. I wasn't like, oh my gosh, what's happening next? So that was the first book I finished. Had a movie. As far as the sequel goes, if you don't know about The Shining from pop culture after the movie, essentially like a horror book, a paranormal horror book. Hella outdated. Stephen King and race is a whole topic in itself, but hella outdated, obviously, because I think it was in the 70s. But then Stephen King made this sequel in 2013, I think, like 30-something years after. Fine. But this was more like a family-oriented paranormal thriller, if anything. It wasn't what I expected. It was cute. I don't necessarily, there were some twists. And can I give spoilers? Okay, spoilers. Skip ahead, if not. The twist at the end with the familial relation was weird, and okay, sure, why not? But it was whatever. I think I gave that one. I think I gave that a 4 stars. I honestly don't remember what I gave each of these books. I will link my reviews for each of these books. The next one I read was The Flower Arranger by J.J. Ellis. This was weird, this book. It was a crime. I don't really like journalist characters, especially women journalist characters in literature or media, because they're just portrayed as so annoying and with little disregard for anyone else. When a man does it, it's because he's searching after the truth. He's strong and fervent in his desire for the truth, and the truth will set us all free. When a woman does it, it just comes off as annoying, as disregard for the rules and whatnot. So anyway, this is set in Japan. The female protagonist is British but speaks Japanese fluently. The male protagonist is half I think it's half American, so half white, half Japanese, and he's dealing with his issues as a mixed kid in Japan. And then everything after that, the setting of Japan was kind of like, oh, let me teach you about the culture of Japan. And I don't even know if the author is Japanese or not, so I didn't really like this book too much. But if you're into books set in Japan, or like crime thrillers in general, crime procedural thrillers in general, like this might be a book for you. I am feeling more and more that maybe any fondness I have for this genre in literature is fading away as I age. So that's that. The next book I finished was The Princess Beard by Delilah S. Dawson and Kevin Hearn. And I think all the rest of the books were books I got from NetGalley. So just the one book, Dr. Sleep, was the only physical copy book. Everything else I had from NetGalley. So The Princess Beard, it's not the first of a series. It's already set in an established world. And it's like this comedy. It was this cutesy comedy, and I enjoyed it. It was cute. It was self-contained, even though it was, not the first in a series, not the first book to introduce us to this world. It was, and there were obvious allusions, especially at the end, towards previous books. you didn't necessarily miss anything by not having read those previous books, so it was very well self-contained. It was good. If you like a comedy, like a satirical type comedy that has little haha modern jokes about puns, because you kind of get the feeling that it takes place in like not necessarily modern times, but like an older time when magic was about, but not super old, so it's about some pirates, a crew of pirates, very mismatched group of pirates, and they all mature as people, and their misadventures, and they all come to accept themselves. So I enjoyed it. It had a good story, and it was funny. So I definitely recommend this book. That is The Princess Beard. The next book I read is Whole Farm Management. I think it was edited by Gary Stevenson. This was a book that, from what I remember, essentially took the material of the beginning farmer's course in Oregon and condensed it into a book form. I'm someone who's fancied herself as someone who might one day want to have a farm. Reading this book, it was really interesting to see the image, the fantasy I have in my head versus a possible reality. What might be things I need to do, what might be things I need to consider if I want to go into farming, and how I might need to change my daydream of farming, my dream of farming, let's say. So that this was a really helpful book. If you're into farming, if you're into even logistics, you might really enjoy this book. It was pretty well written, I think. If you're into farming, if you like plants even, this might be the book for you. Whole Farm Management. The next book I read is Nibi is Water, and I do believe this was Ojibwe. It's a short little children's book that essentially has water-related vocabulary. It's really short, so if you're into, I guess, anything related to First Nations language, or if you're looking for a book to gear towards a kid and pique their interest or help teach some vocabulary, this might be it. I do believe this was Ojibwe specific. If not, I will correct that in a subtitle or something that appears on screen. So I recommend it if you're looking for a children's book to teach a language, spur interest in a language, spur interest in a people, in the history of the Ojibwe. I think this is a Canadian Ojibwe, but I recommend it. So the sixth book I read was The Righteous One by Neil Perry Gordon. So I read, I think in November, I think I finished reading in November, The Cult of Eden, which was a Catholic supernatural thriller. Now, I had very mixed feelings about that book because it's supposed to be a supernatural thriller, but the only point I really liked is when it felt like a horror thriller. When it got really gory to the point of like, oh my gosh, this is horror and I'm disgusted. That's when I liked it. I won't say that I'm not interested in maybe reading the sequel to that book, but when I started reading The Righteous One, this was so much better. It, as opposed to Catholic lore, this was Kabbalistic lore. So, a good versus evil tale across a number of years, and I guess it's kind of like a morality tale, but it didn't feel like one, which is, it's a plus. This book I enjoyed so much more. In terms of like religious fiction, so much better. It was good, and I recommend it if you're into religious lore, Kabbalistic lore, supernatural forces or supernatural fiction. I think you'll find it interesting. It's not a long read, it's quick, and it's enjoyable, so I recommend this book. The next book I read was Home Story, and this was a compilation of entries to a German interior design competition. I think that took place in 2017. So a nice interior design book, pretty pictures inside. Yeah, it would probably make a nice coffee table book. If you're someone who enjoys looking at interior design, it's interesting because it's, German interior design, so it's a regional interior design. The interior design itself, it kind of, once you get the context that it's a new printing of a book that was already published, focusing on an older interior design competition, it kind of makes sense because some of the interior design does feel a bit dated. But archival historical things, because you can see the progression of trends over time. In this case, German interior design trends across the spectrum of designers. The next book I read was A Little Book of Scandi Living. This, I think, was also a reprint, another Quattro Books reprint, and it essentially is like, let me explain to you the cultures of the Scandinavian nations. So it's just Denmark, Sweden, and Norway. None of the northern nations that are among the Nordic nations, but just the Scandinavian nations. So it was really funny, which is interesting because it's like a travel tourism cultural exposition book, but it was funny in like a self-deprecating way. And apparently that's a Scandinavian humor trait, but it came across really well in the book. So I enjoyed this. I think anyone who read it would enjoy it. Maybe anyone who's not familiar or as familiar with the Scandinavian culture, or maybe if you are, I think you might find it funny because you might say, haha, this is interesting that this is what's seen as blah 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 of the given culture. So I enjoyed it and I recommend it. And then the last book I read was Towards the Global Middle Ages. I do believe that this book came out last year, and I think it was through the Getty Museum that the book was published, and it's a collection of essays and a curated artwork accompanies that kind of talk about what are the global Middle Ages. The Middle Ages weren't just whatever image you have in Europe. The Middle Ages, because time is everywhere, took place all over the world. What were they in different countries? What was the Middle Ages in Asia? What was the Middle Ages in Africa? What was the Middle Ages in pre-colonial America and post-colonial America? What were the Middle Ages? What is the Middle Age? Is Middle Age a term that you can apply across cultures? So there was a great discussion in this book. I am a fan of art history, and it's another thing because it looks through it mostly through the lens of art. Art styles, art motifs that have been carried cross-culturally. So I enjoyed it. I recommend it if you're into art history, and it was a good read. So yeah, that's what I read in December. I have a blog where I post respective book reviews as I review them or as I finish them. I post my first impressions of books as I read the first 10% of them. 10% of them being, here's the page count. If the page count is 350, so let me read the first 35 pages from the beginning of the first page where there's text to the story. And if the 35 pages after that first page take me in the middle of a chapter, I'm going to finish that chapter. So that's my first 10%. So sometimes 10% is closer to 20%. But anyway, if you're looking for more book reviews, I'm more active book-wise on my blogger and Goodreads. So I'll link those down below, and let's keep the conversation going. If you are also on NetGalley, let me know, what you're reading, what you're up to. This year, my goal, after this blog post, my goal is, until I am, I'd really like to be done at some point with have my whole shelf cleared. But the thing with NetGalley is, you get books done. And then you're making your way through the chunk that remains, and then you have other books that look really interesting, and sometimes those books are really interesting, and you request them, and you're granted the book early, and it turns out that it's really short, and you finish that book early, so you're still left unchanged. You've read more books, great, and you have more off your shelf, but you had already widened your shelf, put more on your shelf, and you just got rid of it. So right now I'm working my way through my shelf. I'm participating very loosely in the VSCO Girl Readathon. I signed books for my respective prompts, but I'm not getting through those as fast as I thought I was or would have liked, because what I've decided works best for me is trying to read at least 10% at a time of a book. Some books are boring, and I don't necessarily like. I irony of ironies, I don't necessarily like reading on my desktop e-reader. I prefer it on my mobile, but you know, with the brightness and the stark white so sometimes it's hard to read a book. Let's get through a book, especially when it's boring. Thankfully though, what changed the game is I found out that Pocketbook, because I got a new phone, and I don't know if it's a new edition of Pocketbook on this phone or a different for this phone, whatever. But Pocketbook lets you do text to speech. So sometimes now what I'm doing is, I'm washing dishes. Let me just text to speech. Let that speech read play. And if I don't hear something, if I want to go back and make sure what I read, I'll pause it and I'll go back and it'll just restart that last sentence. But text to speech on Pocketbook, recommend 100%. Anyway, thanks for watching, and until next time.